Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 80, A Friend Indeed. After Ash had successfully won his 4th round battle, therefore moving on to the main matches, he was a hungry bastard afterwards. So, him and Brock and Misty all returned to their little cabin that they were staying at, where they were immediately greeted by Professor Oak and Ash's mom, who had somehow gotten there before them, even though they were all sitting together before, but whatever. Ash's mom states how she was going to make a huge buffet and Ash's favorite meal to celebrate Ash winning, and Ash gets excited before he remembers that there was no stove in the cabin that they were staying at, because the Pokemon League was apparently cheap as fuck. So, because of this forces Ash's mom to suggest that they go to a local buffet, and she instead uses the kitchen there to prepare the meal. The chefs are obviously confused by this, as a random lady just proceeded to bust into their restaurant and start using the kitchen, but thankfully they just stand there in confusion, like unable to do anything, apparently because they don't throw her out or anything, because she's successfully able to make the meal. The gang began to worry that the meal was going to end up being poisoned or something due to Ash's mom rushing it so much, but everyone enjoys the massive buffet, including Togepi and Pikachu, who get to eat more than Pokemon food for once. No way! As they eat, Professor Oak proceeds to remind Ash that now that he was going into the main battles, the battles weren't going to be 3-on-3s, but full 6-on-6s, and reminded him that he should really think about which Pokemon to use. However, Ash was just too focused on eating right now, saying that he would focus on it later, and that it was better to strategize once he actually knew who his opponent was going to be. And I mean, that's a fair point, I guess. After finishing their meal, Ash and the gang try to go down the elevator, but as they're entering, they're stopped by a kid named Richie, who demands that they keep the door open before it closes, as he wanted to get down as well. Thankfully, Professor Oak is able to keep the door open at the last second, much to Richie's gratitude, and they all begin riding down to the main floor of the restaurant together. Richie thanks Professor Oak for holding the door open, and we unfortunately never get to learn why he was even up here in the first place. Like, was he just having a buffet all by himself? Well, Richie was more interested in Ash's Pikachu than explaining this to us, as he went up to the Pikachu and immediately asks who it belongs to, with Ash confirming it was in fact his. Richie then goes to pet the Pikachu, and Ash warns him like, yo, Pikachu gets uncomfortable with new people really easily, it'll probably shock you, but Richie's just like, no worries man, I know how to pet a Pikachu, indicating that he may have had one of his own, and sure enough, Pikachu doesn't shock him, really liking what he was able to do with his cheeks. Pause on that. Ash is definitely surprised by this, and apologizes to Richie for assuming that he didn't know how to handle a Pikachu. Just then, much to everyone's shock, the power goes out in the elevator, and everyone begins to worry. Oak assures everyone that it was probably just a power outage. Yeah, no shit. And Brock then proceeds to use the emergency button to call for help, but in typical horror movie fashion, the emergency button doesn't work. This leads everyone to panic even more, but then they see Richie fiddling with the elevator's wires. Richie then asks Ash if he could borrow his Pikachu, and Ash accepts, allowing Richie to touch the wires to his cheeks, which generates some electricity, along with the help of an additional thundershock from Pikachu, turning the power back on. Yay, Deus Ex Machina moment. The elevator then finally arrives at the ground floor, as Ash and the gang thank Richie, who reveals his name, and tells them that they should be thanking Pikachu, not just him, as they run off. Everyone proceeds to comment about how much they liked Richie, when suddenly they all hear a loud noise coming from outside, so they all rush outside the restaurant to see a van with a loudspeaker attached to it, delivering a message, instructing all Pokemon competitors to come to the Pokemon Pavilion in Indigo League to get their Pokeballs inspected, to make sure that all their Pokemon were in proper working order before the main matches, as if the Pokemon Center couldn't do that. The message also stated that if any of the trainers refused to hand over their Pokemon to be examined, then they would be disqualified from the league as a result. So, this essentially forced every single trainer in the league to do this. It's then revealed that the ones behind this message were not the Pokemon League, but Team Rocket posing as them. Their plan was essentially to gather all of the trainers together in the pavilion, and then steal all their Pokemon, claiming that they were taking them for examination. Inside the van, Team Rocket put on their Pokemon League official disguises and laughed to themselves, thinking that they had finally actually come up with a good plan. And I have to admit, this plan was pretty good, because this does seem like something the Pokemon League would do, like fucking disqualify you if you don't comply. Ash then goes to the pavilion with all of the other trainers, as he was instructed, and he meets Richie there once again, even though they had since separated at the elevator, indicating that Richie was also a Pokemon League competitor, and indicating that Richie was also as intelligent as Ash after all, because at the end of the day, they had both fallen for this scam. But to be fair, I guess everyone in the league had. And I mean everyone in the league, as they all handed off their Pokeballs to Jesse and James, who posed as league officials, and put all their Pokeballs inside of a sack. They do this by going up to the trainers one by one, and Ash and Richie are some of the last people that they come up to. When they do, even Ash and Richie put their Pokeballs in the sack, foolishly. Team Rocket obviously isn't happy with not having Pikachu, though, who wasn't in the bag because, he doesn't have a Pokeball, so Jessie proceeds to try and grab Pikachu, this time being fully allowed to, because Ash had foolishly given her his consent. But Pikachu, like Ash had suggested earlier, didn't like being touched by people it didn't know, so it instantly shocked Jessie. Despite this, though, Jessie is able to quickly recover from the shock, and still manages to stuff Pikachu in the sack. But James, being the dumbass that he was, accidentally reveals Jessie's real name when suggesting that they should go now that they had Pikachu, and this causes Ash and Richie to instantly recognize Team Rocket. Now, we know why Ash recognized Team Rocket, because he knew their names, but as for why Richie recognized them, he probably just did because, Team Rocket was a notorious evil group, so yeah. Due to being recognized, Team Rocket throw off their disguises and reveal themselves, and do their motto while bragging about how they had successfully managed to steal everyone at the league's Pokemon. They then managed to successfully escape by driving away in the van, because James had sent out his Weezing to use a smog, which caused smoke to appear everywhere, rendering Ash and Richie unable to do anything, along with any of the other competitors. And I guess they couldn't really do anything anyway, because they didn't have their Pokemon. However, Ash and Richie do decide to try and do something, being the protagonist-auraed boys that they were, and proceed to try and chase down Team Rocket by running, even though Team Rocket was driving in a van. This obviously means that they can't catch up, and this is solidified as the van drives down the hill, which Ash and Richie cannot go down. Well, that's at least what Richie said, being the sensible one, but Ash decides to run down the hill at full speed, and this obviously causes him to begin falling, and he almost falls off a cliff as a result, as the hill led to a cliff. Thankfully for Ash, though, Richie then followed Ash and dived down, catching him in his arms, stopping his fall before he fell off the cliff. Despite Richie just saving Ash's life, Ash angrily breaks free from his grasp, explaining the fact that he wanted to jump off the cliff and go save his Pokemon, questioning why he stopped him. Richie obviously said that if Ash had jumped off the cliff, that would mean that he would kill himself, and suggests Ash that they could still get their Pokemon back, they just had to do it in a smarter way, such as, climbing down the cliff, as opposed to jumping down it. Ash, embarrassed for not thinking of this, reluctantly agrees to go down the cliff with Richie, hating the fact that Richie had essentially just shown him up. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was congratulating themselves while driving at the fact that they actually pulled off a successful plan for once, and as they felt all the Pokeballs in the bag, they determined that there could be over 100 in there, and I mean, yeah, that would certainly make sense. If there was 32 competitors left, and they all had 6 Pokemon, and you took them all, you have over 100. Congrats, you can count. They then proceed to count, as they do so by singing 100 bottles of beer on the wall, but this is eventually cut off as Ash and Richie finish their climb down the cliff and proceed to catch up to Team Rocket, beating them to a spot in the road, so that when Jesse and James approach them on the road, James is forced to swerve out of the way to avoid hitting them. Man, Richie was smart with the climbing idea. Not only was it better than killing yourself, but it also meant that they had a shortcut. Anyways, James swerving causes the van to fall down the hill that was by the road, and therefore land in a lake. The fall down the hill had knocked James, who was driving, out, and for some reason, Jesse and Meowth didn't proceed to get in the driver's seat, so they just ended up floating downstream, with Ash and Richie going down the hill and trailing them. Unfortunately, Ash and Richie aren't able to catch up to the floating van, even as they continued their pursuit late into the night. Ash wanted to keep going due to how desperate he was to get his Pokemon back, and while Richie was too, he acknowledged the fact that they weren't going to get anywhere if it got too dark and they couldn't see where they were going, so it was probably best that they camped out for the night and tried again in the morning. Ash eventually agreed, and they set up camp, with Richie offering Ash some of his extra canned food. As they ate, they proceeded to talk about their current situation and all their memories with their Pokemon and their aspirations to win the league and all that, revealing that they were actually pretty similar. They had similar goals, each of them wanting to be a Pokemon Master and Pokemon League winner, and they each had the same care for and bond with their Pokemon. They were essentially spitting images of each other, with the only difference being that Richie was more intelligent and Ash was more impulsive. They assured each other that they would get their Pokemon back in the morning and proceeded to lay down in their sleeping bags. Meanwhile, it was revealed that Ash and Richie likely weren't losing any headway that they had, as Team Rocket had also stopped to camp and have a big meal to congratulate themselves on having a successful plan for once. Back with Ash and Richie, as they laid down in their sleeping bags, they couldn't fall asleep, as they were too busy looking at the stars in the sky and the constellations that were forming, such as an onyx and one that resembled a Pikachu's head. As they laid down, Ash apologized to Richie for literally screaming at him for saving his life, and the two essentially became close friends, after realizing how much they had in common with each other, once again including the fact that they both wanted to be a Pokemon Master. They then proceeded to have a friendly argument, arguing about which one of them would be the better Pokemon Master. Ash argued that he would be the world's greatest, while Richie countered that he would be the planet's greatest, even though that's the same thing, and Ash then countered that he would be the galaxy's greatest, with Richie countering that he would be the universe's greatest. I think you get it. The next morning, when Ash and Richie woke up, it was revealed that stopping for the night was definitely for the best, as not only had they grown closer, but they could now also see the van's tracks, as opposed to, just pitch black darkness. So, they were able to follow the van's tracks to where Team Rocket was now camping. They noticed that Team Rocket was still asleep in their sleeping bags, so they take the opportunity to sneak into where Team Rocket was camping and sneak right past them into the van where they look for the sack, and they quickly locate it. Unfortunately, just as Ash opens the sack and pulls out Pikachu and notices the rest of the Pokeballs, Team Rocket have woken up. With Richie and Ash currently being in the back of the van, Jesse and James simply shut the door to the back of the van, locking them in as they go into the driver's seat. Ash tries to break the lock, but to no avail. Team Rocket then begins driving, with Ash and Richie still inside, trying their best to figure a way out. They decide to resort to their Pokeballs, so they dig through the sack, and Richie manages to easily locate his Pokemon due to putting star stickers on each of his Pokeballs. Ash, however, has a lot of trouble finding his successfully, and accidentally releases a Drowsy, Slowbro, and Magikarp in the process, before instantly recalling them. Thankfully, though, Pikachu is able to tell which Pokemon are Ash's due to their scent, and he manages to smell Bulbasaur's Pokeball, leading Ash to grab it and send out Bulbasaur and have him use Razor Leaf on the door in an attempt to break it, but to no avail once again. He then tries a tackle on the van wall, same story. This leads Richie to try using a Pokemon of his own, being his Charmander, which he nicknamed Zippo. He instructs it to use Slash on the wall, and Charmander does just that, shattering it and revealing Team Rocket on the other side. Now, if I were them, I probably would have gone for the door, not the wall. You know, like, I know you probably don't want to jump out of the van while it's moving, but I think that's probably a better idea than risking getting into another confrontation with Team Rocket, which was about to ensue now. Jesse ordered James to use his wheezing to attack Ash and Richie, but James argued that he was the one driving, so Jesse should do it. Jesse got pissed off, but she agreed and sent out her Arbok. Ash instantly commands his Pikachu to use Thunderbolt on it, but James, being the dumbass that he was, then almost crashes the van, swerving it, causing Pikachu to fall over. This left Pikachu open to an attack from Arbok, but thankfully, Richie then sent out his Pikachu, nicknamed Sparky, to help out, revealing that, yes, in fact, the reason why he was so good with Pikachu was because he had one of his own. And also, are we going to point out the fact that Richie has Pokemon that Ash has? Like, he has a Pikachu, he has a Charmander, we'll soon find out that he has a Butterfree, spoilers, so that just further proves that they were spitting images of each other. Everyone already knows this, though. Jesse doesn't get intimidated, though, and still just orders Arbok to attack as it was going to. But then, both Pikachus use agility to run circles around Arbok, which confuses it immensely, as it essentially acts as a double team because they're going so fast, so it doesn't know which one to hit. Due to Arbok being distracted, both Pikachu take the opportunity to use Thunderbolt on it, shocking the Arbok, and James and Jesse in the process. This in turn sends Team Rocket blasting off and causes the van to explode. However, despite the van exploding, the wheels were still rolling. It had just lost its top half. Ash and Richie initially don't realize this, but when they do, they also spot that the van was driving towards a nearby cliff, and they were going to go straight off it any second now. So this led them to send out their flying Pokemon, Ash sending out his Pidgeotto, and Richie sending out his Butterfree. Once again, he has a Butterfree, another Pokemon that Ash had before, and has them use Whirlwind to lift them up into the sky, along with all of their other Pokemon and the sack of Pokeballs. Ash being able to locate Pidgeotto's Pokeball, presumably due to Pikachu being able to sniff it out like it had Bulbasaur. However, even in the air, they were not safe yet, as they were falling down too fast. This leads Richie to order his Butterfree, nicknamed Happy, to use Whirlwind to bring them down slowly, and Ash does the same thing with his Pidgeotto, and they safely land, as the van falls off the cliff, thankfully without them in it. Right as they land, Ash and Richie then see a whole bunch of SUVs, driven by an Officer Jenny's, drive up. They had all of the Pokemon League competitors as passengers, and they were somehow aware of Ash and Richie's location after they went missing, and had come to reclaim their Pokemon. Ash and Richie gladly waved to the SUVs as they handed them back the sack, and all the trainers got back their respective Pokemon. Ash and Richie shake hands, having officially become friends over this whole ordeal. And they both return to the Pokemon League registration area. Now, normally, this would be where an episode would end, but this ain't no normal episode. This is the episode before the official main matches of the Pokemon League begin. So, we had to see who Ash was going to be fighting in his first main match. The registration lady from when Ash first arrived at the Pokemon League was also in charge of this, and she instructed Ash that in order for him to find out his opponent for his first main match, he had to fish out a Magikarp from an indoor pond. Each of the Magikarps in the pond each corresponded to a different potential opponent. Ash then did exactly as the receptionist asked, managing to reel in a Magikarp that had Richie's name tag attached to it. Everyone reacted in shock and horror as they realized what this meant. Despite Ash and Richie just having become friends, they were now going to have to be sworn enemies as they fought in their first main match. Damn, what a good cliffhanger. The episode has to end there, right? Well, not quite, because we get one more scene with Team Rocket, revealing that when they blasted off, they ended up stuck in trees. Sucks to be you guys, but I actually think Ash has it worse this time.